I know you're probably expecting to hear Corey in his Q&A session tonight, but we changed plans a little bit on that. This evening we do, as you can tell from the slide, we want to talk a little bit about our trip to Honduras. You were kind enough and supportive enough that you sent 20 people from this congregation to the country of Honduras. First of all, I guess I want to say thank you just for that. Your help not only in helping us to make the trip, you provided supplies and different things that we needed to make that trip. And so we are grateful to you for that. And I just want to give you a little background about where we went. You know, Honduras is a country in Latin or Central America, however you want to term that. It borders both the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. It spans about 43,000 square miles. Honduras is about the size of our state of Virginia, and but a population exceeding over 9 million people. You know, the Honduran people are probably some of the poorest, even in Latin America, let alone the world. I know there are a lot of poor countries over in Africa, but on this side of the world, it's one of the poorest. People there make somewhere in the neighborhood of our $1,500–1,600 per year. That's kind of an average. Now, there are only 4 countries that are even poorer than Honduras, and they are Haiti, Nicaragua, Guyana, and only 3 that are poor. Honduras is the 4th. Rampant violence and a lack of education in Honduras are what lead to those poor living conditions that many have. And Honduras has long been considered one of the most violent places in Central America or in the world. I can't speak for everyone on the trip, but I will say this. We didn't see that part of Honduras. I realize it happens, it's part of it. Most of that is probably in the larger cities. We were actually outside of Honduras. And if I could find, here it is. Yeah, all I got to do is figure out where it is and how to turn it on here. There we go. All right. Excuse me, Corey does a better job of this, but you know, and I'll give you one. We'll see if we can get here. You can see Tegucigalpa in the lower left part of the screen here is where we flew into. That's the city which we started from. If you'll see up in the top right-hand corner, there's a little circle around the Valley of the Angels. And that is where we actually stayed in the hotel. Las Cañadas is actually just south of where the Valley of the Angels is, only a few minutes south of that. Now that's just more of a community, and you can see from the insert there kind of where we were and the type of housing that you do see. But as we go out door knocking in these areas, just to give you a feel for how the life was with us, to go out each day we would have at least one gringo. And that's the term they use for us. Not necessarily, we think about that somewhat maybe as derogatory, but it's not. It's just their term for North Americans. And in fact, I noticed a time or two we would use the term Americans, but reality is they're Americans also. But we're called gringos, so we had tried to have at least one gringo with each team. One afternoon while the ladies were doing their VBS and the men were doing, several of the men were working on construction. I was assigned the task to go out with Herman, who was one of the preachers, and also our guide that day was Kerwin, and most of you who went know who Kerwin is. He's about a 12-year-old, could be 13, but about a 12 or 13-year-old. Know that you remember Anna, and that's her son. but he was taking us around. We had a couple of Bible studies, and which my task, I was relegated to the task of holding the Bible and looking up the Bible references while Herman was actually talking with them. I did have a English-Spanish Bible, so I would stand there and allow them to read it as he talked with them. But as we began to go back to the bus, it was getting later in the afternoon, it began to rain. So we took shelter in a house. We were invited in and asked to sit under, I would call it a porch, but it was more of just an extended overhang in the house. Had some chairs there. And as I sat there, I was thinking, here I am with 6 men in a foreign country who spoke no English. I spoke, as they say, very minimal Spanish, and I didn't feel intimidated. I didn't feel uncomfortable, but that's just the way the Honduran people are in their homes. They're very open, welcoming. I said the worst thing about that was evidently the chair I was sitting in happened to be one of the dogs' chairs, and it was raining that day, and you can imagine what wet dog smells like. But that was just part of it. An interesting tidbit of information about Honduras and their airport. Many of the ones who went are well aware of this because I think there were some intense moments maybe as we were approaching the airport. But depending on where you look and who you talk with and what research you do, it's ranked anywhere from 2nd to the 18th worst or most dangerous airports in the world. And, but Judy and I have been in, I think this is the 5th time we've have gone to Honduras, and we've never had any issues whatsoever. Although, I will say this, when the airplane lands, the pilot gets on the brakes quickly and very hard, usually. Religion in Honduras is basically Catholic with Spanish influence. That's obvious, I think. There are some Anglican, Presbyterian, Methodist, Seventh-day Adventist, and such as that in the areas where we were. You can see here, this is the church in Las Cañadas. And actually, those of you who went, is it 9 years ago? I believe it was 2009 when we went before. It was not much more than a lean-to at that time. In fact, if you'll notice the building on the left, that's the classroom area. And you can see at the bottom there, the wood is beginning to rot. It's very difficult in those areas to have anything. But now we have to meet in, we have a concrete block building. And it's much improved over the tarpaulins that we put up and held our worship service under the first year we were there. I tried to find out how many churches of Christ there are in Honduras. Could not find that information. It's probably not available, or probably not accurately at least. Most churches there are under 50 members. A lot of them more like 15 to 20 members. But they struggle very much with male leadership. A lot of that is the culture in which they live. The people are, men especially, will either live with a woman outside of marriage or live with a woman, have children, get tired of that, and they move on, get another wife, and that's just commonplace in that culture. So many times, male leadership is a problem within those areas. Also being so poor it's impossible or almost impossible for them to support a preacher. As you know that we are supporting Robert Brown. These are the preachers that came and helped us with our week. And Robert Brown is if you'll notice on the bottom row, second from the right, that is Robert. Robert's originally from Panama, but married one of the Roque daughters, and is now living with the Roque family, and he preaches in Las Cañadas. These, as I said, are the preachers who came and helped us. On the back row, on the left, is Oscar Irazo. Oscar, or Oscar as they say, actually was with us 2 years ago and helped us in that campaign. Enrique is in the middle there. Enrique is actually in El Salvador, and those of you who were in El Salvador, I think that was that 2010? You may remember Enrique because we actually worked with the church where he preaches there. But Enrique came and helped us. Then on the right in the back is Elias Roque Jr. Elias, of course, is preaching at a Spanish congregation just in the St. Louis area. And his dad is the one on the bottom far right, and he's the one that preaches in San Miguel congregation there in Tegucigalpa. He also was preaching in Las Cañadas until Robert came to be with them. On the bottom row at the left is Rudis Ramirez. Then next to him is Herman Gomez. One in the middle there in the blue shirt is Armando Galeano. Armando's been with us on probably every campaign that we've had in Honduras. And I think he was actually in the one in El Salvador and may have been even in Panama with us. But Armando has been very involved in campaigns like this. Manuel Perez is next to him. Then, of course, Robert and Elias Roque Sr. And the Roque family, you've probably heard us talk about them. That is probably one of the hardest working families in God's kingdom that I'm aware of. They're all-time doing Bible studies, of course, church activities. They try to operate a clinic in the church there. And it's free for people who can't afford it, but people who can, they do that. But the Roque family is amazing. That's all I can say for them. Most of these preachers are educated in the Panama School of Preaching, very similar to what our schools of preaching are, Memphis, Nashville, places like that. Works very similar to that. They do an outstanding job. They are amazing whenever you sit down and do a one-on-one Bible study. They take people where they are and begin there and teach them where they need to go, what they need to do. And they do an outstanding job with that. As some of you know, it did rain a little bit on us. As we, the ones who were there know that's a little tongue-in-cheek. But it did rain a little bit on us. God blessed us in the fact that we were able to get our luggage loaded from the airport. We went directly to Walmart to get supplies for our VBS and water and things like that for us. And but God allowed us to get our luggage loaded, tarp on it, get over there. Whenever that happened, while we were in there, it began to rain. Well, it rained Friday night, Saturday night, up into Sunday morning, and before it quit. We did lose some time because of that. There were plans to have children's classes on Saturday. We were unable to do that. I will have to say, we had planned to bring them back to normally we go out to them, do the classes and feed them and such as that. But we were unable to do that. So we were going to try to bring them back to the hotel there. There was a room there we could do that in. And I will say this, one of the last things I heard once we got into the vans at the airport was, "Hey gang, these are new vans. We can't ding these." Well, as we were going out to bring the children in for that, one of our drivers, we won't call any names, but his initials are CW. managed to kind of get off the road a little, and the roads were washed out. It wasn't his fault, but roads were washed out. They were awful. And managed to get a little off the road and did scratch the door a little bit. But we forgave him for that. But Corey said he was doing his best. We've always tried to make benevolence part of our work whenever we go to Honduras. And this year was no exception. We used the rainy day that we had Saturday to go out, shop, and buy supplies. And basically these supplies consisted of rice, beans, flour, sugar, and other staples that we put in bags for members at San Miguel and for Las Cañadas. And you can see here the stuff that we got. And what we did, we bought big bags, and then, of course, we had to put those in smaller bags, and so we used Saturday to do that. You can see as some of the things here, packing the bags, getting things ready for that. You can see there on the right, Corey and I are putting the supplies in the smaller bags so we can distribute them later. I don't know where that one went, Corey. There it comes. Well, let's try that. Okay. We had 60 bags prepared. I think actually we've got 50 back here, but we gave away 50 at Las Cañadas and San Miguel. You can see the bags lined up here. And I think most of you who read your bulletin or saw your bulletin, Corey mentioned the fact that these folks, when they received these bags, they received them as blessings from God. They didn't bow their head in shame because they were given a handout. They celebrated this. They applauded when their names were called. They truly appreciated what they were given in the process. And you can see here, again, just giving those bags away. Different people. This is at Las Cañadas. You can see some of the wood there in the background where the men were doing construction and all. But these are also the backpacks which we gave away. We actually supplied those or put supplies in them for them. The notebooks that you brought, the pencils, erasers, things like that we put into them. And you can see the pile of backpacks that we had. And here again, just loading those, trying to put them together, put names on them so the kids, when we gave them out to the children, their name was called, and they loved it. You can see how proud they are of them, how they wear them. In fact, we had one little girl that was, she was a doll. That's all I can say for her. But she struck a pose whenever she got her backpack on, and letting us take pictures and such as that, so we could do that. But it was truly amazing just to watch them. And then again, giving some backpacks out, get an opportunity there to see people, the kids, and the efforts that they got. They got candy. Some of them probably left on sugar highs, but that's okay. They enjoyed what they did. To give away, our total benevolence was 175 filled backpacks that we gave away. 300 flip-flops. Those were furnished by the church in St. Louis. The Roques brought those down with them. We gave away 50 bags of food to members at Las Cañadas and at San Miguel. Also gave away 150 Bibles. In addition to that, you notice back further, we said we had 60 bags of food. We gave 10 to the preachers that were there, so they would have supplies or things that they could take back to their families. So it was a wonderful week. Chris is going to talk about the construction. There he is. I knew he was here. I just didn't know where he was. And so we'll let Chris do that, and he'll fill us in on those details.
So I'll give you a little update on the construction. So while all this was going on, we had a team of about 8 of us that were tasked to try to further their church there in La Cañada. One of the things that we did, you can see here, is we built a small sidewalk that walked into the church that allowed them to walk in without getting their feet dirty. Because if you, let's see here. I'll show you here in a second, but where the rain came, it washed away a lot of their actual ground where they walked in, and so they would have a lot of mud, where was something we don't think about here. They had a lot of mud that they had to clean out every night, and there was two girls that were local to the area that would come and clean that out. So as you see here, the construction team, we had Billy, Cody, Clint, Ashley and Garrett Johnson, myself, Adam Montgomery, and Jake. So the current children's classroom, as Ken mentioned, is the building there that is wood frame, and below it has, I think, 6 concrete piers that are put together with a wood beam that it isn't really structurally sound, but it works for the conditions that they have there in Honduras. This is the inside of the classroom that they currently worship in, and you can see the kids in the middle there at one of the VBSs with our ladies teaching class. So the new children's classroom, when we first started this mission, this really wasn't even a task for us. As the construction team, we thought we were going to be building stairs. It came to find out that the stairs were going to be done by a welder, and they already had that kind of in place. So we got there and learned that, we had to be flexible. It's one of the things that we talked about all along, was being flexible in what we're going to do. So we talked to Robert, figured out what his needs were. There was 3 basic needs. There was the roof that needed to be placed, the windows and doors needed to be installed, and they had a drainage issue, which we'll kind of highlight here in a moment. So day 1, as Ken mentioned, was tremendous downpour of rain. You can see the water rushing down right in front of their church there on the left, and then the stairs walking to the actual church building, and then the right picture is right there in front of the church where the kids actually have to come into the classroom, and so it's rotting away every bit of that wood there in front of it. And my understanding from the mission team that goes regularly, that's something that has to get changed rather frequently because it rots away so often. So day 1, there was a group of us that delivered the windows and doors. You can see there on the right picture the waterfall that we had to trek through to get the windows and doors to the building from the top of the hill. Along with day 1, we tried to do things inside. One of the things that we did was kind of move all their pews and everything around and create a workbench for us to stain their wood with none other than diesel and Clorox mixed together 50-50. It was something they read on the internet, and so we went with it. Day 2 was giving a second coat to make sure that it really sealed all the wood, and then the guys installed the windows and doors, as you can see here. So there was 3 windows that got installed and 1 main entry door. This upper area is solely for the purpose, it's going to take the place of the children's room down below. And then the second task that we did from day 1, this really wasn't even on the list, but it was something that we realized was an issue, was when we came to the site the first day, we saw the water rushing away and just basically covering up all the stones you see on the left picture. And just, I mean, it wreaked havoc on their site. So we chose to find a way to put in a drainage pipe and then an actual collection basin to allow the water to run off and keep going down the hill without really impacting their entry yard. Some more installed pictures of the actual collection basin. We mixed some concrete together and kind of formed. We had to use the tarp because there was so much rain that had collected that just kept filling up. So Ashley actually came up with the idea to put a tarp underneath it so that it kind of created a sealed off the bottom so that you never had water coming up from the bottom. It seemed to work really well. Day 3 was framing in the roof. So one of the hardest pieces was this 12-inch by 6-inch beam that had to get on top of the roof. And then in the picture on the left, we actually took and rotated that and just kept going all the way up the pitch of the roof till we got it in place and then dropped it down in the slots. And then that was really the hardest part. From there, we were able to start framing and cutting the angles in each of the truss members. Which you can see here in the left picture. And then I think the right picture is basically at a point where we felt like all the truss members were together and everything was getting ready to start putting the tin on the roof. You can see that we started to install the tin. I think we had most of the tin done in the first day. We realized that there was some issues and the way that it was overlapped, and then they had tin already there on site. We bought some extra because there wasn't enough, and those two tins weren't matching up, so we had to get some extra. Day 3, drainage. You can see it was a hard day for Garrett. He basically showed these guys how to mix the mortar and create the concrete. Actually, they wanted to do that all themselves. I will say the guy there in the left, his name is Manuel, and I think he's, from my understanding of little Spanish, I think he's 19. And he's been to church ever since we started supporting them. And he was there every day, night and day, and he would help us till dark, basically when we would finish, and there would be a gospel meeting starting, and he would run up to his house, take a shower, and come back down. And I mean, he was one of the hardest workers I've ever seen. So day 4, we had a little bit of roofing to finish. They came back and installed the rest of the roof. You can see the inside of it there on the left, and then on the right is the last sheet getting put up on the roof before the gospel meeting. So where do we go from here? So as I mentioned earlier, they have stairs that have been purchased with the money that was given by Highland Heights, and they plan to install that in the next few weeks. They plan to install a 3-foot wall, 3-foot tall wall around the perimeter of the roof to create like a areaway for them to be able to meet and have a dinner or have service upstairs if it's perfect conditions outside for it. They plan to put 6 columns that are already kind of there as far as the rebar, extend those up to be able to support a canopy roof. Outdoor dining and classroom. And then the last thing that we really didn't get time to do because of just too much other stuff going on was there's some electrical switches and lights that need to be installed inside of the church downstairs where they meet now, as well as fitting out all the electrical for the children's classroom, which we completed. And then this last picture is just something that I drew up to kind of give everybody an idea of what the canopy will look like. And the stairs, you'll be able to come up the side of the building, enter through the vestibule there, and then they talked about having like some kind of wood fire stove or something up here to be able to kind of keep it warm when it gets cool in Honduras. And that's it.
I want to second my thanks to you for your support in every form and fashion that it took. This was my second year to be able to go down to Honduras, and enjoyed it very much. And as you have figured out, and if you've ever been on a trip, or whether it was a foreign trip or if you just simply have gone on a trip with a lot of people, you understand we're presenting to you a lot of the good side of this. Every trip has its hiccups. Every trip has its frustrations. For the most part, we all got along really well, for the most part. And but you know, we're Christians, we're humans, and so there were times that stress got to all of us. You've probably heard by now, a lot of the group came down sick, and some of them have been battling those illnesses on into this week even, and probably still having some effects from that. The stress of the rain and whatnot is really kind of put us behind a little bit and caused that flexibility. You have the cultural transitions, the cultural differences. In America, we are, in the United States, we are very much a by the clock, by the calendar. We want to know exactly what time we're going to go and what exactly the job is. The Honduran people don't think that way. Time schedules are suggestions, and you go from there. And so we had to try to find ways to blend those two cultures together, and for the most part I think it happened. What I'd like to give you just a couple of minutes on here as we close out tonight were some ideas of the preaching and teaching that went on. You knew we prayed about all of these facets specifically right before we left, and so let me give you some idea of what went on in that time period. On Sunday, let me back up here. On Sunday, we went to two congregations, San Miguel and Las Cañadas. Instead of we did have a relatively standard assembly period, but it was a little bit extended in that we had three men who preached, myself, Jake Ravensloot, and then Elias Roque Jr. All preached individual lessons that were more of a seminar scenario, and it was the idea of taking care of the family of God. Elias spoke about taking care for or caring for the generations, the future generations. Jake preached on the topic of caring for one another, taking care of one another. And then I was tasked with the idea of caring for our salvation. And so what we have here are some pictures. This is right here in the middle. This is Jake giving his lesson at San Miguel. But I want to add to this as well. You go down, and when you have a small group and the needs arise, it's an opportunity for people to step up and do things that maybe they are not accustomed to doing. I was so proud of our men who came along, particularly from this particular facet of the trip. All of our men pitched in at some point or another to lead God's people in worship. And for some of these guys, it was the first time they had ever done anything along those lines. Or if they had done it before, it was very rare that they've done it. We have Garrett. They asked for one song to be led in English the day that we were there at San Miguel. And then Cody was over here, led us all in prayer. Throughout the course of the week, we always did devotionals every day. Several of our men engaged in were speakers of that. Chris spoke at that. Dan King gave us a lesson one day. Dan Zajac gave us a lesson one day. All of our third Dan Gray, led singing for us. And it was hard talking about Dan down there. Let me tell you, you never knew who you were talking about. But everybody pitched in, and it was just really a great moment for men to rise up and do things in the service of the Lord. And that's not to say that our ladies were not involved as well. I'll show you some pictures in a minute of what some of our ladies were able to do. But yes, we did swim Honduras. So this is the day that I'll confess, that I got the van stuck. This was the area that we had driven to. And I know you can't see it real well, but these are two different roads. In fact, the one right here on the right-hand side, that little bunch right there, those are bushes that... branches that the men had drug out and stuck down in the hole in the middle of the road. When I went down, I was able to get just to the left of it, and I realized when I got there, half the road literally was gone. There was about a 3-foot drop, 2 to 3 foot drop of a hole that had taken out the rest of the road. But these are the roads that we would drive on. I'll give you another picture of that here in just a moment. So when we would go out every day, this was after everything had dried up. These were the roads that we were traveling on in order to get to the various locations that we would go out and knock doors and take part in. So, and then once we get it, you just never know what you're going to see. At one point we had to stop because a guy was driving his herd of cattle with his motorcycle. And there was another time, guys walking through with his burro carrying sugar cane. You just don't know what you're going to see when you travel around. But as we got out in the different areas, we split up into teams. Those who went out door knocking every day. As was said before, there was always one preacher and at least one gringo. Usually we tried to send us out in pairs. And so this is kind of a rough idea of how we were traversing our way through that area. You can see a little bit of the steep hills that we had to climb. This was glorious because you had concrete to walk on, even though it was almost straight up and down. As we would do the studies, as was already mentioned, the vast majority of the time the preachers would take care of the studies, and that was really more or less because we didn't have translators per se. Of the 7 preachers who came, I think maybe 2 of them could speak English and translate properly. Carlos Hernandez is who Paige and I went out with. I was actually fortunate to be able to conduct a couple of studies. And then I think Ken took part in one when he went out with Elias Jr. a little bit here and there. But most of the time, this is about what it looked like. We would go into their homes. The preachers would take charge. They would sit down. Sometimes we would be able to sit and have true one-on-one studies that would go for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half, just depending upon how things went. A couple of other pictures of how this went. Sometimes we just simply stood outside. We never were invited into the house, which was fine, but we would stand there and they would conduct the study standing in the doorway, which is where a lot of those conversations would take place. This is Anna. I had to include a picture of Anna. Anna is a ball of energy and has a level of excitement that I hope we catch here. Anna was baptized 2 years ago on the mission trip that we took down then, and from day one, and I mean literally from day one as a Christian, the very next morning, she said, "Come out to my house, I have people for you to meet." And she would carry us around to different people, to her neighbors in her area, and would introduce us and help plug us into Bible studies. I didn't know how that was going to go, but day one, we set out to go knock doors, and guess who was there showing us the way? Anna and her kids. And she walked around and she led us from house to house to house to house to house. You guys go here, you guys go there. She would introduce us to people. And so Anna is just on fire for God. And if you want an example of somebody who has caught the vision of the gospel, it is Anna and her family. I had to include a picture of her. So this is Margarita, who Paige and Carlos and I had the privilege of studying with. She is about 55, 56 years old, helping to raise her granddaughter. We started this study right here, sitting outside, and chatted for about all of 5 or 6 minutes, and all of a sudden I felt a presence. You know how that happens? You just kind of sense somebody else is in the room. Right over here is where her house is. Standing in the doorway was her about 35-year-old son. He had just kind of come out of nowhere. And so all of a sudden we went from having 1 Bible study to 2 Bible studies. And we stayed there for about an hour and a half. It was a really, really good study. But what I wanted you to see from this, by the end of the week, most of our time door knocking and the campaign aspect about this was Monday through Wednesday. And in Monday through Wednesday, during that time, at the end of the evenings, we also had the gospel meeting that was conducted by the Spanish preachers. That was done Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. By the end of the week, we had 17 visitors from the community who had not been coming before, and most of those were a direct result of us having gone out and handed out flyers and knocked the doors. There was a max of 102 people who came. That includes the children, but you had 102 people come to this church when normally there's about 35. So you can imagine the excitement that they felt there. All in all, in 3 days, there were 73 Bible studies that were conducted. And when I say Bible studies, I mean things along this line, where we actually sat down, opened our Bibles, and opened up the Word of God for these folks. We had a stat given to us. There were 173 people preached to. I don't really know what they perceived that as, but the best I can tell, it was other conversations, because a lot of times we would be out and about, we would knock a door, we would talk to somebody, and maybe they weren't prepared to study. But we would at least talk to them for a few minutes, introduce who we were working with, what our goal in the community was. And there were at least 184 people who were spoken to in those 3 days in that regard. And then we had 6 restorations between the two churches on the seminar as well as during the gospel meeting. Another aspect about our visit was the VBS and the Bible class. This was taken care of by our ladies, several of them who took part in. We would do the VBS around 2 o'clock every afternoon, and then during the gospel meeting they would also do another Bible class. So these ladies had these kiddos for as much as 2-3 hours a day at portions of it. Just kind of go, this is in Cerro Grande. This was the last day. This is where they usually meet up with the kids on Saturdays, but we had been unable to get there. We were trying to get to Cerro Grande when I got stuck. All right, so this is where we were headed, but these are some pictures. This is Christy Roque right here. She is Elias Jr.'s wife. They live in St. Louis. And so you can see just how they are engaged with the kids. Julie, I know it's shocking that Julie has expression in her interactions, but Julie is doing her thing there one day. Some of the kiddos just taking a look. I had to include this picture. It looks like a Honduran boy band getting ready to put out their first album. But these kids, they're beautiful kids, excited. And then in the course of it all with the VBS at Las Cañadas, over the course of the days, we had a max of 32 kids who came. Cerro Grande, on the one day, they had 40 children who came out. And from what I understood, they were coming out of the woodwork when all that started happening. As we finish up, I had so much more I could show you, and I just don't have the time, but please make sure that you come talk with some of these folks. I do have about 25, 30 copies down here. Some of our other folks who were on the trip wrote their own report, their own review of it. If you want to come grab this, we have one from Judy, from Dan and Janet, and then from Julie and Clint, that just at least have a written form of their perspectives of the trip. If you want to come grab a copy of that, please do. That will give you just other people's ideas and perceptions of it. But I want to give you, as we close out, three lessons that I learned in Honduras. And one of them we've actually already touched on is that Christian charity is a time of celebration, not shame. I am just like everyone else, that I feel like most everyone else is in my neck of the woods. I feel ashamed when I find that I've reached a point in which I'm needing help. In America and the United States, we have this notion, and we teach our kiddos that, well, you have to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And if you can't do that, then you're a failure. Well, sometimes life just gets in the way, and there are things beyond your control. And the Bible commends us and tells us that we as Christians need to be sharing and bearing one another's burdens. And we saw it all over the place, that these folks, that when they received goodness from Christians who were trying to help, they didn't run in shame. They said, God is taking care of us. And so I learned that very, very important lesson. I also learned that the gospel is simple. We are the ones that complicate matters. So many of those conversations that we had, around here, when we want to sit down and have a spiritual conversation with somebody, you never know where the conversation is going to go. And one of our biggest struggles in evangelism is that we tend to start chasing rabbits, and we tend to start talking about things that are not immediate gospel needs. But in this area of the world, it is so simple to simply walk up and just, we have that proverb, keep it simple, stupid, right? And in many ways, I had to remind myself of that. Just keep it simple. Stay on the track with the gospel. But then here's the last thing I found out, folks. And I am a big enough man to admit it. I'm a big chicken. Because around here, it's really hard to just walk up to somebody who's a total stranger and start talking to them about your faith. And I say that as the preacher. That's hard to do anymore. Shouldn't be, but it is. And yet, as you saw, at least with 184 different people, as we went out and about, these Honduran brothers, they had no qualms about walking up and just initiating a conversation, telling them who they are, where they're with, and why I'm here. I'm here to try to share with you about Jesus Christ. And they were willing to listen. Paul said in Romans chapter 1, verse 16, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Why? Because I know that it is God's power to save. And sometimes I find myself being convicted by that verse, and I find myself being convicted by the things that we saw down there, that I'm a big chicken sometimes, and it makes me wonder, am I really convinced in the power of the gospel? Or am I ashamed of it? I hope that as time goes on, I can build up greater confidence, and I hope you too can build up a greater confidence. I hope that we can get to the point where we are not ashamed of the gospel, but that we trust in its power to save. It is powerful enough to save people in Honduras in the throes of poverty. It's powerful enough to save people in Lebanon who are living in the lap of luxury, comparatively speaking. And if you are here tonight and you need the power of the gospel, let me say that it's powerful enough to save you too. And whatever your need may be, if you are not a Christian and you need to give your life to Jesus Christ, tonight is an opportunity to do that. Before you leave this building, you can have your life right with God. The question is, will you be brave enough, humble enough to take the step you need to take? We're going to sing a song of invitation. If we can help you in any way right now, won't you please let us know right now while we stand and sing.